Act 1 is Sam's dead, Dean takes him to a cabin.
Rise and shine, buddy boy.
I whip, the gun goes in, it gets turned, the circle starts sparking.
You know, if we're gonna end, let's end epically.
There's a pretty complex process that goes into the writing of an episode of Supernatural, particularly one as important and big as 222, which is the season 2 ending episode.
You know, the writing process on Supernatural moves pretty fast. I mean, usually what we do is we start with story ideas. So then we get in the room. And I'll tell you, a lot of times getting in the room is usually like a 3 or 4 day process. By the time you start getting into day 2 and 3, then you start talking about, you know what would be a cool scene is this scene, and you know what would be a cool scene is that scene. And then you start stringing them together.
We'll start kicking them around. Before you know it, we're posting things on our whiteboard saying, okay, this part we like, this part works. We're getting closer to a story. And that can take anything from an hour. Sometimes it just clicks and you go, that's it, I got it. And other times it'll be days of going back in that room. What do we like? What do we don't like?
You do it until you have this board, which is like totally covered with like the writing that looks like In a Beautiful Mind, like this crazy madman scrawl, and then you have an episode.
Why did John in the season opener make such a deal and go right to hell if Dean's gonna make a deal for his own soul, but he gets like 1 year? You know, it's like we have to at least answer. I mean, it bothers me a little bit. It's like, if we could, I mean, just a tiny bit, even if it's
I don't think people backtrack like that, but.
Everything's centered on the climax of the episode, you know, the finale. And on one hand, like, it had to be big. It was the season finale, and it was the climax of the season finale. And we were killing the bad guy that has been our bad guy for 2 seasons. So, you know, it had to be huge. And Kim and I, from the beginning, were like, look, we have to do this right or else we're not gonna do it. But it was just, how can you accomplish that with our resources and still make it feel appropriately climactic?
That was the biggest episode we ever attempted, and even after bringing it down a lot, it was still probably the biggest episode.
Basically, 222 is a gigantic episode with a lot of guest stars and a lot of stunts and special effects.
It's the season finale, and it's huge. It's got a lot of emotional stuff. It's got a lot of action stuff. It's got a lot of, I mean, we're tying up a lot of loose ends that have been you know, that have been played out since season 1. So it's a very, very important episode.
222 is probably the most complicated episode I've ever worked on any series. And Kim Manners, who's our executive producer and head director, who did a quarter of all the X-Files, I think he'll say the same thing.
Well, every time you do a season finale, it's like doing a new pilot for next season. You want to set the hook so that the audience really wants to come back and see what Sam and Dean are going to be doing next year.
The challenge was getting the script down into a manageable budget, keep it exciting, and keep both the studio and the network happy that the changes that were made you know, didn't hurt the final product.
And when I got the entire script, I read it, and I knew it was huge. And I worked on the end of Act 3, all of Act 4, and Act 5, and worked for about 22 hours doing homework on it, and then sat down with John Lund, our storyboard artist, and I said, we're going to do 5.5 hours of storyboards here, and basically we're going to prove that this isn't possible to shoot.
And then our production up north calls and says, you know, this script is over budget, and there's no way in hell we're going to be able to shoot this material.
Keep whittling at it, keep whittling at it, keep conversation going back and forth until you reach some sort of consensus, or you simply run out of time.
Because there's another idea that I sort of like.
So the first step was, I was sitting in my seat with the script, reading it over, being like, how can I totally reconceive the finale? Because originally there was this giant devil's trap, and at every corner of a devil's trap there was a church. And inside every church was a holy relic that was really powerful. And Jake was going from church to church to church, destroying these relics, because once he could destroy them, he could destroy this devil's trap. And so Sam and Dean and all the heroes were like racing after him to stop him from destroying these things. None of this is in the final story. So it was this whole subplot that, you know, production called me and said, one way to make huge savings is we can't build any of these churches. So, well, how can we not build these churches? I have all these set pieces and all these action sequences that are taking place at these churches. I said, and what if, and this was sort of the moment where I was like looking at this giant devil's trap. I said, what if instead of these churches and these holy relics, what if it was just train tracks connecting all the different points? And tracks are made of iron, and iron in our show keeps away evil spirits. And you start to think about it more and more, and you're like, God, that's so much cooler, because it's like Western and it's American, and it's so much more the tone of our show. And so I called them and I said, no more churches. Churches are out. You know, it's about these railroad tracks that you're going to get across now, which was this last-minute element that was put into it. And instead of this massive major fight between Sam and Jake, which, you know, when Kim and I were talking through, we said, okay, well, what if they just have a standoff and everyone's holding guns at each other, but because it's supernatural, Jake makes Ellen hold a gun to her own head, and that becomes the standoff. And, oh yeah, cool, that's different, and that's, you know, also simpler, and it doesn't require as many camera setups for Kim to shoot, and it's done as a real team effort. I mean, I think the script actually improved because simpler is better in a lot of ways in terms of story simplicity, and the title of, you know, this episode is All Hell Breaks Loose, and it did.
Go! That's on page 17. The Dean, middle of the page there, damn it, Sam, you almost died. What would I have? He almost lets loose that Sam died.
Right.
You know, that's what makes him cut off. He almost told, I mean, he was probably going to finish with, what would I have done if you were dead and what was I supposed to do, you know?
Right.
He almost gave up the secret there.
Right.
But cut himself off.
It started off as a 6-hour miniseries that Eric gave us, and we've now finally whittled it down to what probably only would be about 2 hours.
The story became a little more contained. The original script was really kind of big and all over the place, and we had to contain it.
They changed a whole sequence where originally in the script, Sam was supposed to fight Jake and have sort of the Rocky Balboa slugfest at the end of the episode. And when he comes up and comes upon Dean and Dad, he's covered in blood that, you know, was the result of this slugfest. The biggest hurdle that we had was the availability of Jeffrey Dean Morgan. He wasn't available during the actual filming of the episode, and we ended up shooting all of his pieces 6 weeks in advance. And we're now going to get into redoing the Jared portion of that on blue screen as well, because Jared isn't going to be covered in blood.
What verbal cues are you I'm just going to say he's walking in. Yeah. Let your eyes shifting from here to here. I'll say now, just look to you for the nod. I'll say he walks away.
And if you want to, during the meat of it, tell me, look at Jensen, look at Jeffrey, just say Jensen, Jeffrey, Jensen, Jeffrey.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Just go right away.
And fill up.
Hopefully it all turns out, and they keep on saying roto me into the shot, which they're just gonna overlap my shot that we just did today with the shots of Jensen and Jeff. It was me and a couple of tennis balls, which is always really interesting, but I think Kim was able to pull some stuff out of me like he always is.
You know, so the blue screen deal was a major crisis and problem, and then we finally got that solved and done. And then, you know, a couple weeks later, the next crisis came up, which was the cemetery, which was arguably an even bigger problem.
We found a location that worked great for this big exterior cemetery scene. But then we realized that the nights up here are only 9.5 hours long. That's all you got of darkness by the time you break for lunch. And we had 4 nights to shoot this sequence and we couldn't do it. So we came up with this notion that we would make it a supernatural solar eclipse and shoot what we call day for night. Well, there were no trees in this location, so we had to find another location to put the cemetery where there were some trees where we could justify some shadowing.
We go to the location we finally thought was going to work, and it's raining so hard we can't even see each other as we're scouting this location.
And we were there for about an hour and a half, and everybody kept looking at each other kind of out of the sides of their eyes. And we realized that even if we shot it day for night, the elements were going to kill us.
We're standing in the middle of this field, and we said, hey, you know what? This is going to have to all go to stage. So now we have to take away all the ideas, all the blocking, everything we knew about what we were going to do for this cemetery, all the stuff we shot with Jeffrey Dean Morgan, and now we're going to do it all on stage.
So at the last minute, we moved it to the interior of stage 3 here at the studio. They're downstairs right now spreading 2 truckloads of dirt It smells a lot like manure. I'm very suspicious of that.
So everybody just comes back, get in the conference room, start throwing out ideas, and how can we recreate best to our ability this whole cemetery?
Everyone's yelling at each other on the phone and trying to figure out ways to solve it, coming up with crazy ideas, but it's painful and hard and exhausting. But when it's all said and done, you look at the final product and you sort of forget all that. There's an expression that pain is temporary and film is forever. And that's sort of true. It's the season finale, and it ends it on an appropriately climactic note, and I think it's going to be one of our great episodes, and it's a major payoff for a lot of story issues, and it's worth it, and it's worth the pain, and it's worth the trouble, and I think everyone feels that way.
Thank you for an unbelievable season, and everybody in that room is the reason that this season has turned out better than season 1.
Starts with the writing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, but you guys are executing like nobody's business.
There's nothing I can say to keep you out of this, is there?
No, sorry.